What's up, everyone? Last week we took a look at the how-to questions. Today, let's take a look at the when to use questions and see what we got. Alright, so let's take a look and see what the when to use questions are. Let's see. First one, when to use process and physics process. Okay, so I know from the outside, both of these might look like the same thing, as they're both running effectively like every frame. However, there is a main difference between the two, and there is an order of operation in which they are both called. Alright, so the process function, now when you start up a new project, or you create a new script rather, you take a look at the comment, you're told that this is called every frame, and that's all the information that's given. But when every frame happens, there is an order of things that are called a process that happens on every frame. And the process function is actually called as soon as possible at the start of each frame. Now, this can be different in between each process call, so it's not an exact amount of time. Right? It's not a consistent amount of time between each frame. It's not a consistent amount of time between each process call. So this number can always change. And for a lot of things that you want to use, or a lot of things that you want to call and have going on in the game, the process function is fine. Now the physics process, this is where things get a little different. It's a lot more consistent in the time between these calls, and the physics process function is actually called every frame, just like the process function. However, the physics process is called after the process function. Now, the difference here is you're going to get more accurate information when it comes to things related to physics. And these things here is going to be things like your position of an object, or an enemy, or your player, or whatever it is that we're looking for. So if you have something that's changing, say maybe a projectile, or the enemy's movement, player movement, you usually want to, if you're going to use something such as a position, you want to typically put that inside of the physics process so that you can have a more reliable outcome and more accurate information put into there. Now, you could put this in process, of course, but if you're calling something that has something to do with those kind of properties, you really should put it inside of the physics process. Now, I myself am guilty of not really using the physics process like I should. That's one of the things that I myself need to get better at using, or create a habit of actually using, splitting up process and physics process information. Another thing I need to get better at myself is actually creating and making logs. I can make proper logs the way they should be, but I need to get in the habit of actually doing them, or making sure that the information is being put out to my logs. But that's a whole nother thing altogether. Alright, let's see what our next question is. When to use signals. Okay. Well, without getting into custom signals and that, because that can all come into very specific situations, or be project dependent, very based on your project and what's going on. But we could take a look at the normal signals, or just the general use case of them. Now, a signal, you have all the common signals that that come with every node, such as on text changed, on text entered, body entered, area entered, all different things like that. And generally they're fine. You call them, it happens on a specific moment. But when you need to go into a little more on the custom side, and you may want to make yourself a custom signal, the general time that you're going to want to use these kind of signals and emit to send up is, or the general rule that I like to use as to give yourself an idea, is if you're going to use a get parent at any point, especially if you're going to use get parent, however many times to go up the tree, it is generally a much better practice to just send a signal up the tree. So the general rule that you should follow is, if you got to go up the tree, send a signal. If you're going to go down the tree, just get the node. And there's actually a difference in the performance speed if you know the different ways to get the node. So you can look at find node, get node, and the shorthand $. These are 3 different ways that we can get and reference a node. And just as something to keep in mind is the shorthand $sign method is the quickest way to get a hold of a node. So the general rule that you want to follow is, if you got to use get parent at least once, send a signal up. If you need to get a node or call a node or whatever that is a child of the one that has the script, then just get the node instead of using any signals. This is the general rule, and the reason that you want to go about this is to help yourself avoid any potential issues in the future. As for example, if you're going to use get parent, there may be a point where that script is on something that it's not going to have those parents, or it's going to have more than just those 2 parents. And this is where you'll run into issues. So generally, you want to use a signal to go up the tree instead of using get parents. Now, this, of course, could be very dependent on what you're doing. There are some situations where you can use get parents if things are never going to change. But generally, signals go up the tree to avoid any issues. Alright, what do we got next? We have when to use delta. Not quite sure what they're meaning to ask specifically about when to use delta. But I'm going to take this as the interpretation of when to take the delta argument from something like the process function or physics process, and when to use that into your calculations for things. So when I would say to use that is when you want things to be frame independent, a little more frame independent. Now, for example, if you have something falling down on your screen, then it can be falling at a smooth rate, right? But then if you end up with low FPS, you may see that object stuttering on the way down. But if you give that a multiplication of delta, then we're going a little more off of time rather than frame. So even though if we have a low FPS, it should still look smooth on the way down. So generally you want to use delta to help get some frame independent movement going on. And that's generally what you want to use it for, is things like movement, if you're going to use or include delta into your calculations. Let's see. Next up, when to use nodes. This is also kind of tricky. Now, when to use nodes. I'm not quite sure what everyone's referring to with this one. The only thing I can think of is to use nodes if you want to work with a graphical interface, which is one of the benefits of using something like an engine versus something made in say Python, where you kind of have to guess the position or work with a row and column system and kind of picture it in your head or check it and then edit the code, check it again, edit the code, check it again. And that's kind of the benefit here. You could create all of your nodes inside of your code to set up your scene. But, I mean, you're still kind of using nodes, right? So, and your whole project is going to be made up of nodes. So I'm not really sure what the actual question is here. But, I can say that if you want to work with a visual representation of everything for moving everything around, editing the properties a little easier without adding tons of extra lines to your code, which you probably do because you're using a game engine. So you kind of have that benefit. Use nodes. Otherwise, build it all through code, which technically you're still using nodes. You're just creating the nodes in the code. I don't know. It's kind of a weird question. Not really sure on what they're using or what they're really asking. Let's see. Next up, use. Just use. What? That's not a question, and that's incomplete. Use signals. Well, we kind of covered that in the when to use signals earlier on the second question there. And I guess to reiterate that, if you're gonna use get parent at least once. Generally, using it once is generally okay, but especially the more get parents that you got to use in there, like get parent dot get parent dot get parent dot get parent, whatever. The more get parents you're using, the better idea it is to just send a signal up the tree. When to use present perfect versus okay. That's I don't even think is English. I want to say that's Spanish related. I don't know why that's here. C# versus GDScript performance. C# is better. Just flat out, C# is going to give you a better performance. But depending on the project that you're working on, this may or may not have any effect on what you're doing. And the benefit that you can do with the engine here is if you know how to use C#, but you prefer using GDScript, then in these bigger projects, you can actually use GDScript and then use C# for specific scripts, right? So you can kind of use both of them together in the same project. So you can only use, if you really just want to use GDScript, you can only resort to using C# if you need that performance boost, and you can't get any more performance out of your GDScript code. Next, should I use a comma before with? That has nothing to do with code here. And when to use a comma with rather, that's again nothing to do with code here. All right, so that's all of our top questions that we have for the when to use section. If you have any questions or you need any clarification, you need help, or you really want to see a video on something specific, go ahead and leave a comment down below. And maybe we'll see that in the next video.